The following is a discussion with international lawyer Robert Amsterdam and journalist Flavius Mihaies about his recent article, Ukraine's Two Wars.
Good morning. As many of you are aware, my name is Robert Amsterdam, and I represent the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We are privileged to have with us the author, Flavius Mihaies, who is a native French speaker, but will be conducting this interview in English. He is an independent journalist. I will stress he is not receiving an honorarium for this. And he has published a very important article in the American Conservative called Ukraine's Two Wars. It is something of a partial synopsis of a trip he took to Ukraine from November 28th of last year to December 18th. Flavius, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I would like to begin with your providing something of a description of both your trip and what your motivation was for taking this responsibility on.
Thanks. I conducted this trip last year, as you mentioned. I have experience working on religious minorities in conflicts in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. And at the beginning of the war in February 2022, I observed that the traditional church, the main church in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, was the target of government pressure, scrutiny, and closure of church buildings. And as an investigative journalist, that raised my interest into better understanding. I have originally, my parents are from the region, Romania, and I've traveled to the region. I traveled to Ukraine, and I conducted that research in order to better understand what was the impact of the conflict on the practice for religious practice in Ukraine.
And can you outline some of your findings for us?
Absolutely. Here in the West, we have a strong. Most of the countries in the West are supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russian invasion. However, the religious practice and religious freedom in Ukraine has not been receiving enough attention. And that matters because what I observe is the tension between the government and the Ukrainian church is not just a question of policy or disagreement. It has a very, very real human impact. And the services have been disrupted. Priests have been sent to jail, house arrest, and that, of course, impacts the ability of Ukraine to carry the fight. It polarized, it divided, it undermined the strengths of the Ukrainian in a time of war, which is when faith is needed, one can argue.
And in terms of the churches that you visited, I understand you visited a number of churches which had been taken by the OCU from the UOC forcibly. Is that correct?
Correct. I spent most of my time in Ukraine on the ground, visiting the parishioners, the faithful, whether they are from the traditional church or the newer church, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU. And what became quite clear to me is the followers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church are prevented from practicing their faith. And this is most striking with the seizure of their temple. And in all the cases, dozens and dozens of parishes I visited across the country, on the western side of the country, western and south of the country, they said that this was done in an illegal way, in a forcible way, using the state, apparatus, law enforcement agencies, and without recourse in every single case where the parishioners have tried to get the judiciary to look at the expropriation, they failed to. So there is a consistent pattern of they've been left helpless, if you wish, thrown out of their temple and left to gather in barns, private home, in less than optimal situations, even dangerous situations.
And when you went to the OCU, the new church formed in 2019, when you went to those churches, was the church in the same state it was when it was the UOC, or had it been changed?
Well, based on my observations, I attended Sunday services and feasts, holiday, if you wish, we call it in America. The relocated temporary housing of the UOC was packed, again in hazardous environment, and the expropriated building which housed the OCU was either empty or sparsely populated. In some case, the church was closed. There was no services on the Sunday, when a few feet away, a few yards away, the relocated UOC was packed.
Had the OCU and the churches they had taken changed the icons in the church? Had there been changes to that as well?
They were actively replacing icons, erasing what they claim were Russian saints, replacing them with what they claim were Ukrainian saints. In some cases, injecting a very, very secular political element to it, such as Mother of God icon, which is Mother of Jesus, perhaps the most sacred icon that they have, if one can say so, and including a Maidan protesters, for example, in that pictography. In another cathedral,
you're saying they made an icon out of the Maidan protesters?
They included the Maidan protester into the icon, and show me the pictures of that, because they were in the process of erasing the icon and traditional icon, the saints icon, if replacing it with what would be the newer, more accurately depicting Ukrainian identity and faith, they claimed. And that icon had Maidan protesters in it, with the hard hat, the shield.
More than simply religious, these became patriotic censors.
Right, and patriotic, but just as much as the UOC. The UOC parishioners were fighting and dying on the front line. Over and over, I interviewed parishioners who were either on leave from the front line, or mothers who their son was buried the next day, literally, and men who had been doing multiple tours on the front line.
And did you find any difference in the patriotism between the UOC and the OCU?
More visual, perhaps, quote unquote, in the OCU, with flags in the church, in Chmielnicki, in the cathedral. They were military brigade flags lined up inside the church. Hooligans who had attacked the church in the time of the seizures were wrapped into Ukrainian flag. The pictures they show me told that. But again, the UOC was just as patriotic, but in the fighting and the dying, but also in the recognition. In two churches in Chmielnicki and Chernihiv, the head priest unfurled the Ukrainian flag from military brigade that were signing the flags in recognition of the support that their parish had provided to the men on the front line, food, gears, you name it. So
and which church was that, UOC or OCU?
UOC.
You've mentioned the church buildings that were taken. In respect to the priests, did any of the priests tell you about threats of arrest or any government involvement with them?
Well, the arrests were already made in near Kiev. I met Metropolitan Pavel. He's the head of the monastery, the Lavra in Kiev, which is one of the largest Orthodox monastery and sort of the Jerusalem of Eastern Orthodoxy. He was first thrown in jail on the accusation of being supporting Russia. and then in house arrest where I met him with electronic monitoring ankle, a very striking contrast of the head of the clergy and wearing a criminal-like monitoring ankle. And when I visited his house, there were two cars with dark windows, which my guide said they were 24/7 SBU surveillance. So one of the young priests that had fled the Russian occupied Kherson in 2022 in order to avoid working under Russian rules, but was working to help defend his church, was thrown in jail weeks after my visit, where he still is in the judiciary limbo, not having access to medication, for example. And that priest told me in December, I will be arrested. There was that certainty that they would come after him.
In terms of the behavior of the government, in terms of freedom of religion in Ukraine, what would you tell people after your trip?
On December 14, I met with Viktor Zelensky, who is the top official in charge of religious affairs for the government of President Zelensky. At the beginning of the meeting, Mr. Zelensky, when describing his work and his mandate, say, I'm absolutely neutral. That's my responsibility and the expectation as a government official working in religious affairs. I asked him at some point in the interview about the comments he made in his prior career as an MP, as a member of parliament, where he stated that the traditional church, the EOC, should be banned, that it was a fifth column from Russia. And at that point, he said, well, how can I be neutral? I think that can give you an idea. And the interview was recorded and can be published.
Well, as you're aware, Ukraine has now passed the bill to ban the church. What do you anticipate will happen in Ukraine as a result of the passage of the bill with those UOC members you met?
Well, it's an interesting timing. During my visit, the first reading of the law had just passed through Parliament, and I asked Mr. Zelensky about the law. If the UOC clergy that I had met were very worried, saying that this was indeed a law that targeted their religion, and Mr. Zelensky's answers in that interview was, well, this law doesn't name the EOC. It simply states that religious organization with a center of power in country that committed aggression against Ukraine will be prosecuted. That's not the naming in any way, shape or form the EOC. However, when we look at how the government, the courts have acted toward the EOC, it's easy to understand why the EOC would be very, very concerned about that law. In every single parish that I visited, the court have confirmed and backed the illegal, what they call the illegal seizure, what the parishioner call the illegal seizure of the church. Territorial forces, local authorities have been supporting the OCU and not the EOC. In some cases, there are conflict of interest where the EOC parishioner told me that the OCU priest has multiple hats, including responsible for the zoning of the land in those communities, and sitting in the local government, or the mayor of one city being also an OCU parishioners. So conflict of interest. Therefore, I can see why this law would really give some concerns.
From a timing standpoint, we will probably end it here, but I will tell people that we're going to not only keep this post on the Save the UOC, but we're going to invite you back to expand on your findings and also provide your commentary on developments in Ukraine as the situation progresses.